Reality's ours. Oh, you know who we are. We might be retarded. Oh, yes, we might be retarded. Reality's ours. Sing it now. You know who we are. Oh, you know who we are. We might be retards. We are reality's ours. Oh, Nate and Thomas, they're speaking truth. You know what we do. Yes, you know the things we say not allowed on YouTube, but we say it anyway.
That's right. It's the Reality Czars podcast with Nate and Thomas, the paranoid motherfucking American. Come cackle with us, but be warned, it's gonna get real spicy. So buckle up for the truth, y'all. This is the Reality Czars.
Reality Czars. Oh, you know who we are. Oh, you know who we are. We might be retards. We are Reality Czars.
And we're live. Welcome, everybody. This is the Reality Czars podcast, and I'm your only host today, Nathan, and I am very fortunate and blessed. I have the great and powerful Dr. Narco Longo on for a part 2. Hell yeah, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Nate. Good to see you again. Happy to be
see
back.
you, man. How you been, dude? Did you do anything fun for the solstice?
Not really. Just hung out of my house, worked at the bookstore, and nothing too crazy. But
Hell yeah, dude. I went full on well, I wouldn't say I went pagan, but we were out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and we just had a big giant bonfire, and I don't even know what pagan is, and I don't even know if you're supposed to celebrate the solstice or not, but I think that we kind of talked about that last time, and I think it's all right, as long as I'm not like worshiping some creepy demon. And we were in the middle of nowhere on a peninsula in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, and it was fucking beautiful, dude. It was fantastic, and I drank a little bit too much, and I don't drink anymore, really. But some guys had left a bottle of really nice Pendleton whiskey, and I decided, fuck it, and I got hammered, and I regretted it in the morning. But I'm back to sobriety, drinking bubble water, so here we go.
awesome, man. glad to be part of the recovery process.
So actually, let's start there. What was the water that Jesus turned into wine, and is it okay to partake in alcohol? Is it just about small amounts, or I think, because specifically I think in the Bible, if I'm not incorrect, it just says don't be a drunkard. Is that correct?
Yeah,
so
that's
the key word moderation, maybe.
That's definitely one interpretation. Going off the Bible, you're definitely not going to get a condemnation of, drinking wine. But I'd say that the best place to start with that is, what was this wine that they were drinking back then? And I don't know if we touched on it at all last time, but water, sanitization, sterilization was kind of iffy back then. I'm not denying that ancient people had wonderful means of, purifying water and transporting it, and aqueducts and all that stuff. That stuff's amazing. But for the average person traveling city to city, you're still doing a lot of camelback, horseback, out in the Middle East. Water sanitization. Am I saying that right? Sanitation. Yeah. Keeping your water clean was a big issue back then. So just like we see in the Age of Discovery, kind of the pirates and the conquistadors and all them, one of the biggest killers for those European explorers was not having clean water, getting scurvy, right? From lack of sunlight, lack of clean water, infected water.
Vitamin C.
Exactly. Yeah. They a couple days eating citrus clears it right up. But when you're stuck on a ship for 90 days, if not more, that's quite a voyage. And you've got to remember, traveling in the desert's much like that, right? And actually, that's a very interesting parallel between astrology and where you have sea travelers and desert travelers. You know, the people traveling the desert. We kind of forget that's like an ocean. So astrology would help you in both instances. But the whole wine thing. Wine in ancient times, what we call wine today, definitely would have been mostly water, right? Not wholly fermented grape juice. It would have been water with a fair amount of alcohol derived from the grape, because the grape naturally ferments. Unlike most other, most other places we get alcohol, it's artificial fermentation. Grapes naturally ferment into alcohol. So it's the most effortless, natural form of ingesting alcohol would be grape wine. Can I go let someone into the door here? Sorry.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, no worries. I'm going to ask the doc, actually. I'm curious if he partakes in a little bit of wine drinking from time to time. Yeah, I've never had anybody biblically say that it was wrong per se, but my wife's family, they're one of the folks that, like, it's Welch's grape juice or nothing with with the Eucharist or.
Oh God.
So we're recording, I guess, during store hours here, so he has to answer a phone call here. Wow, okay. Not sure says Longo has never had alcohol. My wife is the same way. She is a complete teetotaler, has never had alcohol ever.
Hey,
you can answer it if you need to, brother.
No, I gotta. There's two sets, and even if I don't answer it on this one, it keeps ringing on that one. Sorry.
Okay. No worries, man. I was going to ask if you ever partake in a little bit of a fermented grape drink yourself, but somebody in the chat says you have never tried it, which is impressive. And my wife has also never had alcohol. My wife is a teetotaler.
Yeah, I can't say that I've never had it in my mouth, but I've never been drunk in my life. Not once. So I've, high school times, there was a couple instances where a couple friends like dared me to do it, or, and to be honest, beer is vegetarian. I'd usually drink if it meant getting high on weed easier, or like if I didn't have weed, if I had to, or I'd trade, with friends, but I never drank or got drunk ever. I've had maybe vodka in my mouth. I've had some beers in my mouth. I've had things like that. And I swallowed, but I never got drunk. So, my dad was an alcoholic, and that was a big, big lesson for me, is never drink. It's good to learn from those lessons. My father was a heroin addict, and so heroin was something I never tried. I did every other drug that you could imagine, but no needles and no heroin. I was a wild man. That's kind of my route too. My dad would say, "You can do any drug you want." He said alcohol's the worst. So I really took that, as he meant it, and I've never been drunk. And I'm very thankful for it, because people in their 20s people my age who I saw drinking a lot, definitely was a hindrance for them, definitely holding them back, definitely taking days out of their, a lot of wasted days. Not that I don't waste days too, but yeah, I don't drink. Honestly, I think it's evil. I think it's worse than flesh eating too. We talked about last time. Mm-hmm. Flesh and blood and sacrifice, and if I had a choice between hanging out with a flesh eater and a drunk, I don't care who I piss off with this, but if I had to choose between like a barbecue addict, just slurping up blood and stuff, but not drinking, versus a drinker who's a vegan vegetarian, I'll pick the blood. I'll pick the blood guzzler because
Dude, alcoholics are tough to be around. Drunks are tough to be around. If you're not on the same level with them, it's a weird thing, dude. If you're sober at a party and you're just around drunks, it's the worst thing ever. I was actually going to ask your opinion on this because I've heard a lot of people talk about like alcohol or something like that, like it actually being a host. Like when you drink too much, you're allowing spirits into you. I was going to ask your opinion on that.
100%. Yeah, that etymology is true. I'm a big fan of that, especially that rabbit hole. But I want to tie it back to the, what were they drinking back then? What was the wine back then? The wine back then, short answer would be Jesus's sect, or the multiple sects that he emerged from. The Essenes, the Nazarenes, right? People call him Jesus of Nazareth. There's a very high likelihood that was his title, not his place of birth. I'm not the first person to kind of ask that question, but Nazarene was a title. Jesus the Nazarene. And the Nazarenes and the Essenes, most of them, it's kind of like saying Gnostic, it's an umbrella term. There's a little bit of kind of conflicting groups, but one of their their main practices were pretty much no animal sacrifice, hardcore vegetarianism, and no alcohol. It even says they abstained from wine. And I think that means alcoholic beverages or something that could get you drunk. But that's not to say that the average person 2,000 years ago might have been drinking alcohol on a regular basis, just kind of as a survival need. If you can't get to a well or a spring and you have a bunch of water, even if you collect rainwater, not everyone has a nice copper vessel or something nice to keep it clean. A lot of times you're keeping it in animal skins, you're keeping it in old gourds and stuff like that. It gets nasty real quick. Alcohol, a few drops of some strong alcohol will kind of sterilize a container of water. And that's the intended use for alcohol. Alcohol is meant to be a slave. It's like a little alchemical demon that's like chained up on a leash.
It's it's inside of the genie lamp. Yeah, we get the genie inside of the lamp, yeah.
Exactly. Now, if you take that to the point of like overconsumption, you become the slave. You drench yourself with that kind of dark energy, that spirit attached to alcohol, and it has devastating effects. So it is kind of like playing with fire, right? And they often call it fire or water, right?
Mm-hmm. My people did. We called it fire water.
Yeah. I really think that Jesus would have stayed away from drinking. I mean, I think that goes without saying. He even talks about getting accused of being a drunkard, right? He probably never drank alcohol to the point of inebriation. I mean, his brother James was a lifelong vegetarian and virgin, we're told. Now, that might have meant continence, like being continent, but apparently James was a lifelong virgin. So these guys took some of their vows very, very seriously, and it wouldn't surprise me if they never, ever got drunk. But, alcohol's in everything. A lot of what you drank would have just had it in there back then, and you can take too much. So, I have a pretty soft stance on that. I don't think the Bible makes a devil out of alcohol, but it certainly can be a devil. I think the Arabs and the Muslims kind of have one of the most sober understandings of alcohol, because of course that's where we get the etymology. Al-Ghul, like you were saying. Al-Ghul is pretty much one of the Islamic or pre-Islamic Arabic, local indigenous. I'm not an expert on Islam or anything, but it's basically like an Arabic demon devil.
I need to have one on the show. I've been talking about it. I've had the Ortho Bros on the show where I picked them apart and asked them all the questions. I've had some Mormons on the show. I need to get an Islamic brother on here and kind of pick his brain apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here, one's calling in right now, actually.
Yeah. Durka. Islamic Jihad. Yeah, I like it, dude. Yeah, they're interesting folks. I don't think they have everything wrong. I think Wahhabism is obviously very flawed. Like, they have their extremist sects. And I don't agree with them on most, but at least they don't think my God is boiling in a jar of excrement or something like that, like some other folks.
Yeah. No, it is kind of it's like being on a winning sports team, kind of, there's a goal, but everyone else on the team, you don't share the same ethics, the same morals all the time. The coach you might even hate, the coach might hate you. I also like to look at it like a chessboard, make sure all the chess pieces are in their right place, like, I don't know if I used this analogy last time, but, don't put Jordan Peterson where the bishop's supposed to go, right? Keep him where the psychologist's supposed to go, If you keep people in their lane and let them serve you in what they're best at, you really can't go wrong, and you can kind of glean the best out of everyone. But, man, what were we talking about? I completely forgot.
Alcohol. Then we got into we said the Muslims, right? I was going to say the Mormons. Yeah. Al-Qul, right? They, Al-Qul. Yeah. And I mean, we can jump into some other things here too. And I'm very pro sidetracks, dude, cause that's how my brain works anyways. Mm-hmm. We were talking about the Nazarenes. We were talking about Jesus's sect. We were just discussing his brother being a virgin. A lot of people want to say that Jesus got married.
Jesus got married.
What is your stance on that? To Mary Magdalene, right? The whole idea of like, I guess, what is it? The Merovingian bloodline and things like that. That is the actual Holy Grail, was Jesus' bloodline that kept going. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that complete Gnostic gooberism, or is there anything to that?
Man, I hate to let you down, but I really don't know much about Mary Magdalene, beyond just what's in the Gospels, but no, I mean, I can speak on Jesus having multiple brothers, only one of which was said to be a lifelong virgin, James, like I said. The other one or two, probably not as pious as their brothers, and definitely could have had kids, in which case there would be a bloodline of Jesus running around.
Because that is the supposed story, right, from the Knights Templar. They came to, to fight the good fight here in the Holy Wars, and looking for the Holy Grail, they didn't find a cup. They found the Holy Bloodline of Christ, and that was the true secret that they were hiding and occulting. And that was passed down, I guess, maybe married into the royal bloodlines, and that's where they claim to have the blood of Christ, and that gives them a divine authority to rule.
Well, let's say this. I've never heard of any Jesus bloodline stories that talk about him having kids before he was crucified. So, going outside of the Bible here, we can venture to say that there's a lot of people who theorize about his body disappearing and him surviving. And in that case, he potentially might have had kids. Now, personally, I don't think he survived. I really don't think he survived that fateful day,
Not in the flesh, in my opinion, yeah.
On or near Jerusalem. But I think some things were done with his body. His body was moved, maybe even sent to Europe. Okay? So, but let's just entertain that theory that maybe he survived, and maybe he went off and had kids, right? Well, there's one thing that I don't think I've ever heard people talk about on YouTube. correct me if I'm wrong. If you've heard someone else say it, please tell me.
Let's go, dude.
Because I arrived at this on my own, just using like the phonetics. Do you know what the Greek word for resurrection is?
No, I don't.
Anastasia.
Okay.
Anastasia. Okay. Now, when you go to a doctor, and you need a surgery, and they put you under,
Anesthesiologist.
we
Yeah.
call that anesthesia. Now, from what I've seen online, there's nothing at all connecting those two words. No etymology, no none of it. Nothing. Purely the phonetics. Anastasia, anesthesia. There was a ointment or a perfume that Jesus was doused with. And I've got to check this. It was either nettle or, hang on, this perfume. What was the perfume? Nard.
Oh, okay.
Nard. Yeah, I said nettle. I don't know what the fuck nettle is. Nard. Apparently it says nard. There might be a couple of words for that I'm getting wrong.
What's the spelling of that?
N-A-R-D.
N-A-R-D, okay. Just like it says,
Nard.
okay. Nard.
Yeah, so before Jesus was kind of turned in to be crucified, he was doused in this very valuable perfume. And the people who are around him even kind of say, hey, listen, he's special, but he's not. They're kind of joking, like, he's not that special. Why are you dousing so much on him? And Jesus, of course, has like a very, very witty kind of response. But to think that he was being dosed with that much perfume, it doesn't make sense for it to just be for the smell. Of course, it kind of, you can think of Jeremy Fragrance kind of fervently like reading this passage in the Bible. Jeremy Fragrance?
I don't know Jeremy Fragrance, no.
He's a Florida legend. He's a German perfume guy who is obsessed with telling people he's the #1 Christian perfume influencer, and he douses perfume on his body. He sprays it into his eyeballs, And I like
that. Sounds horrific. I knew guys that wouldn't shower and just douse themselves in Axe body spray in high school, and it sounds kind of similar.
Inshallah. But so Jesus was doused in this potent perfume that might have some psychoactive effects or been mixed with something else. But yeah, he was doused with this perfume, and it was kind of mysterious why that happened. Let me see the exact verse. John chapter 12 verse 3. A pound of nard, a pound of spikenard. Yeah, various names for it, but
it's a rhizome. Yeah, I'm reading about it right now.
Very expensive perfume. So that's one thing that Jesus was pretty much getting dosed with. Then you have the Roman practice of crucifixion. It was common for them to apply a narcotic to the victims to either keep them alive for longer, not to die from shock or pain, and having some people will die just from having a nail, driven through your wrist or your palm. So they give you a narcotic, something to either slow your blood, thicken your blood up, or just to keep you from bleeding out or, dying of shock. Get you real loaded on something before they put you up, so you could endure the, Longanius. Yeah. That's a good point. It's funny. That's So that's another potential thing that Jesus was dosed with. So this is not my, I don't subscribe to this, but I am very interested by the etymological, the lack of etymology, purely phonetic link between those. That Jesus was potentially dosed with something. Again, not what I believe, but according to this tradition or theory, he would have been dosed with too strong of a dose, or two things mixed that shouldn't have been mixed, like the spikenard and got him extra high to where his heart stops. So they think he's dead. So, people think about Jesus, oh, no one could survive that, right? Stabbed in the side, and he'd been whipped all the way there. And, people forget that Jesus actually expired very, very quickly on the cross. Very, very quickly compared to other planned Roman crucifixions. It was usually 3 days, up to 3 days or more. People would sit on a cross, in agonizing pain. So one of the theories is that Jesus was too strongly dosed, and it died too soon. But he wasn't actually dead. His heart was just slowed or stopped, or something like that. Not denying, this still would be a miracle in a sense, but that Jesus,
they didn't have Narcan back then to bring you back from opium overdose.
Yeah. Well, that's one theory, that Jesus was dosed up. They thought he was dead, took him down off the cross. He wasn't breathing, blood wasn't pumping, his heart wasn't pumping. And, he looked dead, sounded dead. They put him in, they rushed him to a tomb. And then he woke up sometime later. I took a boat to Britain and, lived his days out, or he went back to India. And, that's why I really don't give much credence to that theory, because after then it's kind of like, all right, then what happened? It's kind of like the Hitler going to South America thing. It's like, really?
Is that a fake picture? I saw that. I mean, it's everything from the CIA, I think, is fake. But wasn't there like an FBI photo of somebody that looked like him, and it's black and white, and he has a little mustache, and he's old, of Hitler? Anyways, who knows? It's probably all bullshit, and just. I've listened to enough people that have made the case that the amount of drugs that he was on and the shape of his body at the end there, even if he hadn't shot himself in the head, I don't think he was going to live very long. He was pretty fucked up.
Yeah,
but who knows?
He'd already been bombed once. I think passionate people like that don't just give up on their movement. If a crappy little boat captain's going to go down with his ship out of pride 100 years ago, you best believe someone like that's going to go down with the ship. That's just my opinion. I like to think that he's in Antarctica right now. And he's he's flying, a robot body. Yeah. Yep, he's out there flying the flat Earth spaceship, piloted at the South
All we
Pole.
do know is that the body that the Russians gave us was of a female, and so they've never actually found the remains of Hitler. They say here he is, and they've done testing on it. It was a lady, so wrong body.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like that. If Jesus had this really big message that he was willing to die for, and then he miraculously survives, I don't think he would have stayed alive much longer. He would have just kind of charged right back into the problem and made another scene and, a righteous kind of lesson out of it, and would have gotten punished for something, all over again. That's just my opinion, because, some of my favorite early Christian experts are secular. They don't believe in the divinity of Christ at all. They don't believe in any of this. Some of them believe it's all created to be anti-Semitic. That Christianity was an anti-Semitic psyop. Then you've got a bunch of people, like I was debating a couple days ago, a lot of people who think Christianity is a pro-Zionist psyop. Zionist or whatever.
Only after what
you called it.
1875 or something like that, then it started becoming that way.
Right. Well, whatever the theory that Christianity is just a dog on a leash for some
Yeah,
group
and,
behind the scenes,
and I've heard actually someone make a pretty good argument about the same thing for Islam as well. That it was created by the Vatican and as kind of
Well,
a pit bull on a leash as well, which is kind of interesting. But
I said last time I was on that Catholicism, mainstream Islam, most Islam. I mean, I don't really know any exceptions, but Christ. Oh, I almost said Christianity, but Catholicism, most of Islam, if not all of it, and then of course rabbinical, Judaism. You can't deny that these are all the synagogue of Satan. That's biblical. That's not me, slandering anyone. And they show that with their headwear, the headwear of choice, the days of worship, and things like that. So, Islam's supposed to be a goddess worshiping culture originally. But you see that by the fact that they worship on Friday. That's Freya's day. Freya's day is Isis' day, Aphrodite's day,
yeah, I wish I had all my research in front of me. I'd done a lot of research actually about like the Kaaba and about the big black square that they like to run around in circles around.
Yeah.
But that there was a deeper, like more ancient religion, and it was a divine feminine worship that they had before it kind of got subverted.
Yeah.
Maybe
Now,
from the Vatican. I don't know.
Now, if anyone's a dog on a leash, Islam's the dog on the leash for the Pharisaic tradition, right? The Tangu, let's just call them. Okay, the Tangu. You're familiar?
Yes, my friend actually just made a series, and it's on YouTube now about the Tangu and the connection there. It's actually pretty phenomenal. Go check it out. Despotic Ambitions is the name of the channel. It's a brand new channel. Needs to pump up those numbers, those rookie numbers. But he's doing good work. Despotic Ambitions. Heck yeah.
Yeah, and
But we could
Islam,
definitely call them the Tangu or the Brazilians. Is that what we were saying last time?
No, because YouTube started thinking that I hate Brazilians, or I love Brazilian people, but yeah, Tangu.
The Tangu. All right.
Tangu. Well,
heck yeah, dude.
Islam is Venusian religion. They worship on Friday. That's Venus Day. And you can see this. The men dress very feminine. The buildings look very feminine, right? You see all that very flowy, right? All the way from Egypt to India are ancient Venusian people ruled by Venus. Friday's their holy day. Now, whatever happened with Islam, which I think is a Tengu creation, that turned them into a cube worshipping culture. Now they're like ants spinning around the cube. That's not the original form of Islam, not the original form of ancient Arabic, religion. And yeah, it is Saturn worship today. Originally they worshipped Venus. People think that the crescent is the moon, right? Most people think the crescent's the moon. Well, why is it always the star and the crescent? It's Venus. Venus, when you look at it through a telescope, this is not a NASA thing. You can see this yourself. Venus presents itself as a crescent much of the time. Close to half the time. It has phases, just like the moon. So you're seeing a crescent Venus. And Venus is one of, if not the brightest light in the sky, other than the sun. Anyone who knows, about the heavens will know that Venus is the true crescent. The moon is a crescent, and the moon has an affinity with Venus. So you do see the moon and Venus together. But the crescent of Islam is undoubtedly the crescent of Isis, the crescent of Aphrodite, and Ishtar, Astarte, etc.
So I have a million other questions for you. Uh, let's talk about holidays, dude, because I have a lot of I've had a lot of guests on the show, more of the hardcore radical Christian types that will shame you if you get a Christmas tree on Christmas. The whole Ishtar Easter connection there, but then I've also heard that there's other connections with like the eggs, but that was like a more of a Catholic thing, I think. But they say that eggs are fine and it's a Christian thing. What the hell's going on with it? Can I celebrate safely? Am I in danger of hellfire if I want to have an evergreen tree in my house?
Yeah, these things are not owned by the pagans. Just like the holidays themselves, the days that we select for these holidays are always astrologically created. And no one culture has a monopoly on the equinoxes or the solstices. I mean, that's just like beyond being a hyper literalist. It's being like a narcissistic literalist. It's kind of like these people who, and the Irish are guilty of this too, looking around the world and seeing the same myths and being like, they took that from us. They took that from us. The Christians took that from the pagans. The Christians took that from the Romans. And, a little bit of syncretism, if you're not smart enough to handle it, can get you drunk. And you start congratulating yourself for finding all the similarities, and you really get drunk on it. You can get drunk on the syncretism. And I'd say that astrology is the best remedy to this. And it's not just the Christian and Roman thing. You see a lot of like the Black community saying, oh, these are the Moorish sciences, and they took the chakras from us, and they took the, all this shit. Well, all of that belongs to the heavens, and each culture gets their fair chance of, explaining it and, recording it. So all these cultures thinking that everyone stole something from someone else. They're like little kids arguing over a toy, right? This ultimately came down from the heavens. Christians are allowed to interpret the equinoxes and the solstices how they see fit. If they see something from the pagans they like, they might take it. If it's not evil, if it's not invoking, evil or the devil, is there anything wrong with fertility? No fertility, no life,
man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd say that kind of like, astrology helps remind people this is a universal truth that we're each getting kind of slivers of understanding into. And astrology remedies that narcissistic impulse to say, and I don't know if the Garden of Eden, maybe I'm guilty of it with the Garden of Eden and Atlantis and all, I want everything to be in Florida. But I like to think that by using astrology, you're avoiding the mine. They took the 7 chakras from our culture. They took the 12 signs of the zodiac from our culture. I mean, that's BS. It's just BS. So I think that's kind of the underlying attitude that so many people have when looking at Christian holidays of, oh, wow, you found one thing that they had in common with like a Germanic tribe. Congrats. What are they supposed to do? Condemn it because it's not useful? I think, if you want to talk about one holiday, an example, Easter is the spring equinox, but it's not just the spring equinox. It's recognizing the full moon or the first Sunday. The churches are a little different, but it's almost always the first Sunday after the first full moon following the spring equinox, because they want it to be festive. So you use if you're just going for the spring equinox, yes, it's a momentous day. Yes, it's important, but you're not guaranteeing that people are going to be into it, right? A full moon increases the odds of people being into more, wanting to go outside, right? Wanting to party a little bit. So if you combine the full moon with the spring equinox, that's where you get Easter, right? So some cultures just look at the spring equinox and say, okay, March 21st, that's when we party. Christianity has kind of an intelligent way of approaching it, and they might have inherited that from someone else. And like I said, the churches disagree. But no one culture has a monopoly on these dates and even the planets. A lot of these lowercase g gods that people think Christianity replaced, Christianity just put them back into their place. They took them out of a competition with the one true God in heaven.
So much of it, I think, has to be about intent, right? I mean, I would think at least. So something like Easter, like I can celebrate this as the resurrection of Christ, right? Or I can say that he died and then he came back 3 days later. And if my heart is in the right place and I'm actively celebrating that, I'm not necessarily celebrating Ishtar or Imama or Imana, rather, whoever whatever they're trying to tell me this is about. And you can also, like exactly what you said, we can celebrate fertility, and it's a good thing inside of like a married relationship. Be fruitful. That's what the Bible says.
Yep. If anything, it's reclaiming these things. Okay, cool. Like, someone got caught doing a satanic ritual in a church. So what? That's just a satanic ritual spot forever? No, clean it up. Smoke some sage, clean it up, reconquer it. It's kind of the same thing. Like, association is not the same thing as like causation. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but just because pagans are doing the same thing doesn't mean they're stealing one from the other. They could just be tapped into the same. Pagans are intelligent. Pagans aren't just serving the devil. They're serving light and truth in their own ways. There are just a lot of strings attached when you get involved with the lesser gods, the lowercase gods. When you start sacrificing and, paying gods for certain things, that's where it gets messy.
There's a weird repaganization that I've been trying to embrace a little bit. So not necessarily like paganism per se, but there is so the way that I was definitely raised in church, there is this whole, you can't celebrate nature sort of thing. Like all of this. But to me, I'm celebrating the creation of God.
Right.
Like to me, I have always felt a deeper connection in a forest. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest out here with redwood trees that you can't see them. They're the tops of them are in the clouds. Some of the biggest fucking trees, some of the oldest forests on the planet. Oh, yeah. And I feel a connection with the Holy Spirit there. And I'm celebrating God while I'm in that's my church while I'm sitting under one of those trees. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it or necessarily pagan per se, sitting by a river on the edge of a tree, because I'm worshiping my creator. And I think that there is something that Christians are afraid of, like I guess maybe nature worship and things like that. I'm not worshiping the tree, but I am respecting the tree and I'm respecting the creation that God made.
Yeah. No, yeah, well said. Pagans don't have a monopoly on nature. They like to think they do. Some Christians fall victim to that mindset, like you're saying. And I think you also pointed to the ultimate truth behind this is you're worshiping the creation, not the creator. And I don't think spending time under a tree is worshiping that tree. But if you're not thanking God for the tree, you're just thanking the tree for being there. Like the tree is its own god, or there's a god.
It gets goofy with the Gaia shit. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that is a lot of the dark feminine creeping its way in. It does creep its way in. Well, let's get to that. Remind me about...
I do. I want to talk about the divine feminine, because that was something that was that part of the way. Was there a respect of the divine feminine? Where does that fit in with Christianity? Was that like done away with like the Council of Nicaea, kind of Catholicism? They fucking killed the divine feminine and replaced it with the Holy Spirit, is what I've heard. Like, let's jump into it.
Well, I kind of take it a different route. I'm a little bit of a, I don't know, misogynist, whatever you want to call it.
Let's do it. Let's go.
I'm not buying into the whole divine feminine thing.
Okay.
The divine feminine is the spirit of Lucifer in disguise. The divine feminine is the dark feminine. and there's only the dark feminine. Okay, that might sound harsh.
All right, we're gonna get into some Lilith shit here. Let's go.
That might sound harsh, but the dark feminine is this negative impulse, this seductive impulse. Oh, I shouldn't. I'm so full. Should I have those cookies? Should I have those extra sweet candies and stuff like that? That pull, I mean, you feel it, right? You've felt, or that chick down the street I always get myself into trouble with the analogies or examples, but the chick down the street that you're not supposed to be seeing for whatever reason, or but
my buddy's sister that was 3 houses down from me. Yeah, that was I'm very familiar.
Yeah, so whatever it is. Whether it's candy, whatever your weakness is, and we have a bunch of weaknesses, but that pull, that tug, that is the spirit of Lucifer. Satan doesn't tug you that hard. Satan really is kind of more hands off and hits you with the check at the end of the meal, if that is, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Lucifer
hands you the rope, lets you hang yourself. Yeah.
Satan's almost the owner of the restaurant, or the manager or something. Lucifer is much more of the server. Lucifer is the one who's saying, oh, this isn't as bad as you think. This is wonderful. This is sweet. Indulge. And
so the divine feminine is an allegory for temptation.
It is. And that's why
that makes sense.
That's why Eve is Lucifer. That's why Eve is evil. We get the word evil from Eve, not because she was evil, although by definition she was. We're not saying evil like she was a murderer or she was a killer. We got to take the context. Eve made the first quote unquote mistake. And I'll also give the devil's advocate, the Lucifer's advocate here, that Eve made the correct decision. But we got to recognize the origin of sin and evil, saying that when Eve created or opened up Pandora's box by, accepting free will, taking the initiative, taking free will, welcoming free will into the minds of man, she also welcomed the spirit of Lucifer. So it's there's a catch. And ultimately,
it was Lot's wife that was turning around to look back on her sin and turned into a block of salt.
Sometimes when you give women instructions, they like to kind of interpret and, frame it emotionally and kind of reinterpret a little. And that's nothing bad. It's just, women can't be depended on, just like the moon can't be depended on. Because a woman's never the same 3 days in a row. Never. Ever. A woman will always be different 3 days from now than she is today. Because that's what the moon does. The sun is the same every single day. Every single day. That's the masculine discipline. So it's all about holding ourselves to a high standard. And I'm not saying like I'm a perfect, male, example or anything, but I'm really trying to dig into the etymology. So woman welcomed this spirit of free will into mankind. Remember, free is the word, comes from Freya, like Friday, Freya's day. That's free, freedom, being free, right? Libra is Lucifer. Libra is where we get the word liberty. Mm-hmm. Liberty,
Libertas,
free will.
Yeah.
If you want to understand the spirit of Lucifer, look at liberalism.
Dude, I have such a hard time with this because I was such a retard libertarian, and I thought like libertas, liberty, and this goofball bullshit. But you're absolutely right that it is like spitting in the face of order. It's embracing chaos. It's almost spitting in the face of God, saying that it's so individualistic too. It's the hardest individualistic like mindset and philosophy. The entire idea of it is very Luciferian. Mm-hmm. And I've had to come to grips with that over the last couple years.
And you'll notice it's feminism that really did the work on liberalism and took it away from being a sensibly minded Democrat, like JFK or his, predecessors. There's been great liberals and great Democrats, but the spirit of Lucifer really stepped to the forefront with the feminist movement and the women's suffrage movement. Freedom to vote, freedom to do this. It's all it is more freedom, more welcoming in dark energy. And people say, how could that be? Because,
well, why can't we do gay porn in the middle of the streets? It's Pride Parade. This is my liberty. This is my freedom to do this. I can wear dog ears and get spanked in front of kids. It's satanic, man. It's evil.
And liberalism is the spirit of Lucifer running rampant. Lucifer is the light bringer, and Libra means the same thing. So in the Garden of Eden, you see Adam and Eve. These are kind of Aries and Libra. They're all opposite each other on the zodiac. Aries rules the first half. Eve rules the second half. So, we have to thank Eve for bringing in all these great, sciences and arts. And Eve made the first act of free will. And that welcomed the spirit of Lucifer, but also opened up liberty, right? And I want to clear up the fact that it wasn't evil because she hurt someone or killed someone. It's evil because it's the first evil act. We're not holding it in the same light as murder or theft, but remember, nothing that bad had ever happened. This quite literally was the greatest crime ever committed. And it changed things. So we're not saying that it was evil in today's sense, because we have all these other things to compare it to, like murder and all that. But Eve, when she did that, it's kind of like Cain and Abel. Mankind needed to run into this obstacle, needed to overcome this, encounter it, to understand criminality. So, just like Cain and Abel kind of had to happen. We didn't know what murder was. We didn't know why it was bad. We needed to know why it was bad. And unfortunately, that means kind of inviting it down to supper and kind of engaging with it a little bit. So that's the essence of Eve being evil. It's not that she's bad or worse than Adam. Adam, and this is another thing. Women learned the art of manipulation through Lucifer, through the serpent. The serpent manipulated Eve. And without even realizing, she manipulated Adam right back. She learned it, passed it right on. So that's all I'm saying about Eve and evil and the feminine archetype being responsible for the darkness and so on. And I'd also want to say that, going back to the nature worship, you do see something with these people, and this is Dr. Longo you're talking to here. So I'm always going to say, go outside, be barefoot as much as you can, be healthy as you can be, sunlight, all this stuff. But I also got to say, these people who take it too far, and they're barefoot everywhere, their toes are like fucking 8 inches wide, like I've been spreading my toes for 36 hours, like they're just obsessed with getting grounded and obsessed with, this one with nature. If you can get drunk on that too. And I do think that is another aspect of not the divine feminine or the dark feminine, but Mother Nature and these dark spirits kind of using Mother Nature. Mother Nature is our best friend, but without the divine authority of God, a masculine God in heaven, I didn't come up with the order of the universe. Fire and air belong up there. Father, fire, air, ether, Father, up there. Mother, down there. Mother is water and material, matter. That's earth. Matter, madre, material, down there. That's the order of things. Like, hate it or love it, deal with it. There's an authority, the author, the Father, authorities up there. The mother receives this as above, so below. It's not so below as above. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, and it's not
Don't-
less than we need them. They are beautiful, powerful. They are life-giving, life-creating. Yeah, they are our partner. And so when my wife listens back to this, don't kill me. But,
No, we love women. Yeah.
But yes, I 100% agree, man. 100% agree. And I like what you had to say as far as like divine feminine is it's just an allegory for, I mean, I've never even heard someone say Eve with evil before, but like that makes sense too. And that being the very first evil act. And it was disobeying God's direct, authority.
And also, Freemasons, believe it or not, are not satanic. And your co-host is a Freemason. He can
Shout out Thomas, we love you.
Yeah, he can prove me wrong, or enlighten us if I'm wrong on this. But if there's one thing that Masons behind the scenes can be accused of, it's not Satanism.
Luciferianism.
It's Luciferianism. They believe that.
I give him shit all the time, dude, because half the time he might be. Who knows what the. Yeah.
Well,
love you, Thomas.
It's not that. I admit, I concede that Mother Eve made the right decision. We're here where we are today because of Eve's decision. God didn't want just another monkey in the garden, kind of eating, crapping, reproducing, or not even reproducing. I don't know. Yeah. And then what? Nothing to figure out, no problems to solve. I think God wanted us to struggle, wanted us to be confronted with an ugly world and to kind of want to make it better and to be confronted with death and to want to overcome it and all these things. And, the Garden of Eden, as much as I love the concept, it was like a monkey enclosure. We didn't. It was,
dude. We
were
in an awesome zoo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%, dude.
So I think it's our destiny, and I also want to say that the Luciferians, E. Calloway, the guy who wrote the Garden of Eden in Florida book called In the Beginning, he was Florida's 1936 Republican candidate for governor. He is really, really heavy on the Eve made the right decision camp. He believes that Eve should be glorified for eating the fruit. And you can kind of qualify that as Luciferianism. Now, I don't think he'd like that title, but it's really kind of overly glorifying the act of the eating of the fruit. And a lot of the tech people today, a lot of the technocratic people today, they're like kind of Promethean minded. Prometheus was helping us. Lucifer to them is almost like the serpent is almost like Prometheus.
Well, it's the same story. It feels like, yeah.
They justify a lot of what they're doing because they think we should continue eating the apple. Every chance we get to take a bite from the apple, we need to. So they want to launch us further into the industries and technologies and whatever. E. Calloway takes a different approach. He just thinks that Mother Eve, that God was testing them. God was testing them. He wanted them to eat the fruit.
Well, in a way, it almost does feel like that. I think he knew it was going to happen, right? If God is omnipresent and omnipotent, then he kind of did know that it was going to happen. And the same thing is true with Cain and Abel. And I think that is something that really interesting that you put there was that like it needed to happen for like humanity to advance. And unfortunately, Cain became almost like the avatar of that act, that evil act. And embodied that story and brought it to humankind. I'm curious, Doctor, they say something like that Cain, when he left, right, there was other people and he went and got hitched and got married. Mm-hmm. Who were those other people?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. And E. Calloway actually dedicates a big part of his book to that. So this is the guy who believed the Garden of Eden was in Florida, and that Noah's Ark had escaped America and landed in Turkey or Armenia, where it is today. And a big part of it is Mother Eve. What was the fruit? If the Garden of Eden's in Florida, then what was the fruit? Where's the fruit? So he talks about the fruit being symbolic and allegorical. But the as far as Cain meeting other people, it's called the land of Nod, I believe. Cain went out to, or helped create a city. I need to freshen up on that, but Cain goes out, and the way that we read the Bible, the King James version, is what I like to use. Adam, Eve, no Lilith in the King James version, or the texts that inspired the King James version. That's more of a mystical kind of Hebrew mysticism thing. But Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and like you said, Cain leaves. Now we only know about those 4 people, but Cain meets a whole nother population, like you said, a wife. Well, there's a theory or a tradition or a group of theories, a discussion about the 2 creation theory, or the 2 separate creations of man in Genesis. So Genesis chapter 1, we're not in the Garden of Eden yet, right? It's just kind of the world, right? And you'll notice that God makes man, male and female, let us make them. And he gives them a couple instructions. Chapter 1, verse 29, he tells them what to eat. And, 28, chapter 1, verse 28, he tells them to have dominion over the animals, the fish and, the animals, stewardship is the original word, actually, stewardship over the animals. So he gives them dominion over the animals, and he gives them, I'd love to talk about the hour image too, about the multiple forces of creation, but Adam and Eve are not created yet. The first creation, seemingly, and I could do this a lot better if I had the Bible in front of me, but the first creation was basically...
All those books behind you, and none of them are the Bible?
No, I'd have to disconnect, but...
That's all good.
It's basically, the first creation is male, female, and you know what? I do want to read it. I can get it quick. The first creation only has a couple of endowments. So let's look at this. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Out of nowhere, God goes, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air." Okay, so dominion. And then it says, verse 27, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air." Blah, blah, blah. They've got dominion. "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth." So he tells them to eat vegetarian and all this stuff. And that's the first creation. That's it. Kind of fast forwarding through it, right? Just kind of glossing over it. Now, most people interpret the second chapter of Genesis to be a repeat, or kind of like a rewind, zooming in and telling the story with more details. That's the predominant way to read it, and most people read it that way without thinking about it. The more mystical interpretation, or kind of conspiracy theory, almost Zechariah Stitchin-y, Lloyd Pye way to interpret this is, by the way, E.E. Calloway beat all those guys to the jump, beat all those guys to this theory about multiple hominid species. He was before Zechariah Stitchin, before Eric von Daniken, and before Lloyd Pye and Graham Hancock. E. Calloway, the governor we didn't deserve, okay? But
Lord Pye's still pretty badass. Yeah,
I love
Lord Pye. Yeah.
I love Lloyd Pye, yeah. E. Calloway says the first creation was kind of almost like a Bigfoot or like a caveman. That the first creation was close to man, close to wonderful, close to perfect, but it wasn't endowed fully with all the talents that man has. It didn't quite have the same, sacred geometry in the face and, the beautiful voice and the ability for arts and sciences. And again, this is just one theory, that the first creation was essentially like a Neanderthal or a hominid species, a worldwide man, a kind of more bestial man, the one that God didn't have special plans for, according to this theory. So that's the first creation. Then in the second creation, God creates the Garden of Eden. So now we're really zoomed in on one specific spot. It seemed before that God just made, he kind of cast these men out just like he did the fish and the cattle, and it's not all contained in the garden. So the second creation, chapter 2, tells us, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. So we're kind of in the same, from the first verse of the second chapter. It's really easy to miss. This is not just zooming in on the previous creation. The first verse of the second chapter indicates that it's a continuation. God just got done creating, just got done resting, and then boom, he's going to create man in the Garden of Eden. So we're kind of, if you really look at it critically, this is a separate creation. It's a more detailed, creation.
So I had I'm trying to remember exactly which guest this was, but we've had like a couple black nationalists come on the show too and talk to us about how white people are monkeys and they're created by Yakub and different things. But we've also had some other folks on the show that they were saying that it was almost like the apple was maybe an allegory for a genetic manipulation, that we were something more like a monkey. And it was almost like the monkeys touching that, what's the word that I'm looking for? But dang it, man. What's that movie? Anyways, the monkeys go and touch what movie was that? I can't think of the name of it. But anyways, that was a genetic, this is talking about a genetic manipulation, this story, about taking this on, and that we became human after that apple. That we were maybe something, we were animals, but like we were above the other animals. There was something different, but there wasn't, and I guess that makes sense, right? That was maybe our eyes awakening. That was our little, like, a divine part of us that became more like God once we ate that.
Yeah.
But they were saying that this story was more of a, explaining something, simple people explaining an actual genetic modification. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, that could ring back to something like, like some Sitchin shit.
Yeah. It's also, the stoned ape theory.
But that's true too. 100%.
Really big into this is that, I don't think I take it with a grain of salt. I don't fully buy into the stoned ape theory. I don't know if it was instantaneous or generational use of mushrooms.
2001: A Space Odyssey. That's what I was talking about. Thank you for saving me there. Yes.
And, you brought up the race element too. Not to be, if you're going to bring up that side, the other side of it would be that the first creation in the first chapter of Genesis was a race of men, but they weren't special. They're just kind of a step above the animals, like you're saying. Now, I'm not going to say what race that was, but, some people run with that theory and use it to say this is why the races are so, miles apart in certain ways. But And then the second part of that would be, well, let's talk about the second creation, because that gets us to who Cain was talking to, right? I think that's what you originally asked, was who was Cain bumping into? The second creation was after the seventh day. So God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work. And also something to notice, the seventh day does not end. I'm not saying I'm an expert on this theory, but the seventh day does not end. So God's resting forever, according to some interpretations. And this is kind of where you get deism. This is one of the earliest kind of influences on deism is, well, God did 6 days of creating and they all ended. Then the seventh one doesn't end and he just rests. He makes it blessed, he sanctifies it, and then it just goes on forever. So
that makes
actually,
sense. Yeah.
one of the early Christian takes on the Sabbath, people say, why don't Christians use the Sabbath of Saturday? Sabbath means Saturday. You know, it means
And I was
Sabbath.
going to ask you this because I was actually very curious. I have friends that are angry at me because I was going to a church that they would celebrate this Sabbath on Saturday, and they're like, "You're a Saturdays recognizers." I was like, I don't fucking know what I'm doing. I like this. I like the church that I'm going to. But what is the correct day to celebrate the Sabbath? Do you still celebrate a Sabbath? Do you have a relaxed rest day? And what is the proper day? Because to me, it just seems like the Catholics changed it. I think Saturday is probably the right day to do it if you're going to do it. But I have no idea. Tell me, Dr. Longo me here. Let's do it.
Well, the real Sabbath, if you're going by the name, is Saturday. Now, that Sabbath, the Mosaic Sabbath, the post-Moses Sabbath, is done away with. Jesus, made it obsolete. And by the way, it has nothing to do with the original creation. In fact, it's giving Saturn's Day, worshiping on Saturn's Day. Because remember, it's not just a day of rest, it's a day of intense worship too. Saturday, if you're worshiping on Saturday, you're unknowingly worshiping Satan. Unknowingly. It's like if you go out, why does everyone go out partying on Saturday? Because all those bad mistakes, all the sins you're making, they're best funneled right into Satan's mouth when you do them on Saturday. That's why, that might not make sense to some people, but it's true. We unconsciously act out this planetary rhythm in the week where you go back to work on Monday. You go get your money. You need to make some money. You go back to work on Monday, right? Tuesdays
on Moon Day. Yeah.
Tuesday's big for competitions and fighting days, and people work hardest on Tuesdays. It's confirmed. Wednesday's hump day. It's in the middle. Wednesday, Mercury, in between the gods, and in between man, in between masculine and feminine. Wednesday's middle day. Mittwoch in German. It means middle. Middle is Mercury. Thursday, blah blah blah. You know this already, but when you worship, when you worship on those days, you're subtly worshiping the god attached to them. So Sunday's the best day, and Thursday and Sunday are the original Christian holy days. You can worship Sun, you can worship Thursday. Those are the best days to read the New Testament too. Those are the best days to kind of really take your meditation or religion seriously. Friday's best day for going out on dates, more seductive, everything's more sensual on a Friday. People normally go out for dates on Friday. Then people get fucked up on for Saturday. Everyone wears black. Everyone acts like a Sabbatean rabbi on Saturday, right? Debauchery and anything that happens on Saturday you kind of ask forgiveness for on Sunday, right? You like sweat it out, you go to the beach, you pay for your sins. And so there is this planetary rhythm in the week, this routine. So it's not the mother of all, it's not the end all be all of being on the side of good or being on the side of bad, but it is an unconscious kind of form of worship. So Saturday, we don't know what the order of the days was. That's the issue. We don't know what the seventh day was in God's order. We know that Saturday is the seventh in today's order. Maybe. Sunday's the first day of the week, they say, right? Well, Sam Shamoon has a good thing where he talks about the Christian Sabbath is always. And he points to that instance where God doesn't rest on the seventh day. The Sabbath goes on forever. This is the Sabbath. Acknowledge the Sabbath. If you live like every day is the Sabbath, you're naturally going to get closer to the Garden of Eden. Less work, less appliances, and I'm not saying the Jewish Sabbath, like the kosher law Sabbath. I'm talking about just having a day to yourself to worship and not work. We have our bookstore closed on Mondays, not for any spiritual reason, just one day a week. But for Christians, every day is the Sabbath. Jesus did away with the Sabbath. Jesus did not observe the Sabbath. Okay, so he
that is true, 100%, dude.
He did if he felt like it.
In the face of the Pharisees, he was healing people on the Sabbath, and dude, that is a great point. Yeah.
So the seventh day never ended, and the Seventh Day Adventists kind of play with this concept a little bit, but seventh day, it never ended. We're still in the seventh day, and God blessed it and sanctified it. And I think people got trapped into this weekly cycle, thinking there was a weekly Sabbath. The early Christians kind of reconciled this by saying the Jewish Sabbath was symbolic, meant to represent the 6 days of creation and the seventh day, but they completely forgot the importance of the seventh day and the eternal nature of the seventh day.
They're all law.
Yeah, kind of.
Law, yeah.
But this ties into the going back to the Cain and Abel, the second creation. God creates the garden and puts man in the garden. And this is clearly after the seventh day, so a totally different creation. So the people in the Garden of Eden are a separate race, at least, if not separate species to the original man. The original man, you can't even call it Adamic, because it's not even Adam. It's unnamed. This could be, like I said, a Bigfoot type thing, a Neanderthal type thing. This could just be monkeys, because God created the cattle and the birds, and doesn't say monkeys. Doesn't say monkeys. And I think the Hebrew word for monkey, let me check this, might be Adam. I could be wrong. Oh, no, it's Koph. Okay, yeah. It's not Adam. But Koph, and I forget why I was... Koph, it's a letter. There's a Hebrew letter that means monkey, which is interesting because there weren't many monkeys in the Middle East, 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's full of them.
We don't tend to think of the monkeys in the Middle East, but they had a word for it. So that's another evidence that Judaism came from Hinduism a little bit, believe it or not. But okay, so God makes Eden. He makes the Garden of Eden, and then he places a new man in that Eden.
In our image.
Yes, and this is saying our image, especially. And let's see, where's the creation of man? And the Lord God, this is chapter 2, verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. So now we have form. The first creation did not have form. It was just an image. And breathed into his nostrils. Okay, we've got form and the breath of life. That wasn't given to the first creation. I'm going to have to double check in a sec. But form, breath of life, and man became a living soul. Those are three endowments that the first man didn't get. And those are kind of exactly what you'd expect from a monkey to a man. So, you know, evolution people, you can almost kind of have like your cake and eat it too, you know, with this kind of theory. But just going back to the first creation, when God makes man, it's just an image. So back to chapter 1, verse 26, the first creation. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. Okay. Those three are pretty nice, but they're nothing like the form, breath
The
of
breath
life,
of God. Yeah.
and then the living soul. Form, breath of life, living soul. And form is, you know, the Platonic concept of form. That is kind of the active ingredient of God in creation, because Saturn, this is going to get us into L and our image, you know, our likeness, our image. That first creation. Well, I forgot what I was going to say. Saturn is the creator of this world, or he rules this world. Saturn is a slave to the one good God in heaven. Saturn is Satan. Satan had a big hand in the creation of the world, you could say, in the material world. Saturn rules everything that is subject to space and time, ruled by Saturn. And this isn't the demiurge.
Kronos. Yeah.
It's,
I was going to ask if there was a connection with that in the demiurge.
there is a connection. It
Okay.
is a connection. They're connected to each other, but it's the best way to understand the demiurge. I reject Gnosticism and most Gnostic, you know, concepts. But whatever. Just going back to that second creation. Form, breath of life, living soul. When we think of form in a Platonic sense, Satan rules everything subject to space and time. Saturn is time, and his wife Rhea is area or space. Time and space. Kronos and Rhea. Kronos, Rhea, and Thor or Tor, their son. This is the creator, the three active ingredients in creation: space, time, and form. Form has authority over space and time. Form gives purpose to space and time. Space and time are subservient to form. So form, that's why Plato is all about forms. Jupiter, in this sense, would be the author, the king of forms, you know. And that's the creator. That's where we get the word, composite word, creator. Shout out to Santos Bonacci. That's where I heard the
OG here, yeah.
Yeah, that's where I heard the creator thing. But so form is being the endowment of form shows us that we were outside of, we have this ability to triumph over matter and time. That's the endowment of having form. Another way to look at it is form, you know, you've seen those pictures of sacred geometry in the human face, right? And the beautiful women and all the curves and, you know,
Right here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That kind of sacred geometry in the face, that precision, I don't think that original creation had that. It was an image and a likeness, but it didn't have this form. So the second creation has form, it has the breath of life and a living soul. That's man. That's the highest form of man. Whatever Adam's bloodline is the best version of man, it seems. So that, you know, circling back to your question, when Cain is kicked out of Eden, Adam and his family, they're the ones that have form, breath of life, and a living soul. When Cain gets kicked out, And he says, oh, what are you going to do? You're going to kick me out? All the people are going to kill me. God doesn't say, what people are you talking about? God knows exactly who he's talking about. Cain even knows who the people are. Cain knows there's people out there. Those, I like to imagine, were like almost like jungle people, cavemen, wild men, tribal. They weren't Adam and Eve's family, just to put it plainly. Just they might have been like Aboriginal Australians compared to like a modern day American, just hopping off a plane and seeing each other for the first time. They would have been like that, if not a greater difference, right? So I think Cain was kind of got the short end of the stick there. He had to go get like a bush
bride.
Exactly, a bush bride, and or even like a Neanderthal wife or something like that. And I think he probably had to settle for less. But another part of this is who's Abel's wife, or who's Seth's, the new kids.
I was going to ask about
kids?
that. Where do we come from in this situation? Yeah.
Now, another part of this is Eve was taken out of Adam's rib, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Zechariah Stitchin and Lloyd Pye, one of the good things that they do talk about, because I'm not big on the whole space alien intervention thing, but they do a good job of talking about how Eve came out of Adam's rib. Let's read it here. I've got it up. God creates man, right? And he gives him formed man of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Then he plants the garden, he puts man in it, blah, 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 blah. We get the description of the Garden of Eden. He gives man a couple of commandments.
The man was too logical, too functional, and he needed chaos and temptation in his life. So God said, "Get over here."
It's kind of like watching a movie where nothing bad happens, and they just like eat delicious food and go to sleep on time and live the life normally. Like, who's gonna watch that? Who's gonna partake? It's boring. And the same goes for like the other side of it. Who wants to live in a world where everyone's enlightened? Who wants to live in a world where everyone's hooked up to a supercomputer and you get the same answer? Everyone gets the facts. There's only one fact. Everyone knows the facts. You don't want to live in that world. You want to live in a world of belief and faith and, disagreements and, blah, blah, blah. But
yeah, agreed.
In the second creation, God realizes, okay, Adam's lonely. Let's make him a woman, right? Now, let's realize here, second chapter of the Bible, we've got seemingly like a surgery going on. And the Lord God, just chapter 2, verse 21. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. Also, you know how Jesus is known as the new Adam? I think we said we'd talk about reincarnation a little bit. Okay, the greatest cases for reincarnation in the Bible.
This is one of my big questions for you, because I am a weirdo that does believe in reincarnation. And tell me if I'm wrong, or tell me,
No, I believe in reincarnation. As a Christian, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. They're completely compatible. I think the benefit of Christianity, the lesson learned, is that you shouldn't give too much of a crap about your past lives. You left them and you died for a reason. Don't spend a bunch of time trying to figure them all out. Don't blame your problems in this life on those. So I think Jesus paying the sins of all the previous generations, that largely severed this generational karma thing. I think you really do have a clean slate every time you're born. And I'm not going to say I know all this for sure, but I do believe in reincarnation in the sense that the ancient Greek philosophers believed in it. And the Bible does give indications of reincarnation. or at the very least, people invoking people who had came before almost into their body and in spirit so they could achieve things and directly right the wrongs that that person had caused earlier. But the two most clear examples would be John the Baptist being referred to as Elijah come again, Elijah born again. Elijah has, some people say John the Baptist was like Hermes Trismegistus. I don't think that. If anyone was, Thomas had a closer connection to the Hermetic tradition than anyone else. But John being said that it's Elijah come again. And then Jesus, we call him the new Adam. And in fact, we believe that Jesus was paying for Adam's sin. That's another thing, women. Don't take it out on us for calling you evil earlier, okay? We love you guys. And by the way, Jesus paid off the debt, regardless of gender. He didn't hold it against the woman. So I'm with Jesus on this. He paid the debt. The man, if your woman dents your car, you don't make her pay for it. You pay for it. It's something like that. But Jesus pays off the sin. And we notice that the wounds that Jesus received are a direct callback to Adam. Adam being put to sleep. We even have this Anesthesia. Adam was put under anesthesia. God caused a deep sleep. He's in this anesthetic state. He's being operated on by God. God takes out a rib. He takes out a rib, cuts it out, opens it, takes out the rib. That's where Jesus was stabbed in the side by Longonius. You can even see the word lung. I don't think, was that Longonius? Yeah, he's the guy who pierced the side of Jesus. Yeah. Nothing to do with my name, by the way. I didn't choose Longo for that or anything, but Longonius stabs him in the side. You also see the word lung in his name. Long and lung mean dragon, serpent. That's what, dragons in China are called lung, lung. So it's almost like the dragon, like Lucifer, who's also called a dragon at one point, stabbing Jesus back in the side. And you see the same wound, a kind of reflection, an echoing of the wound that God caused to take Eve out, to take out Eve, and then Eve caused the sin. It's almost like Jesus is not closing it up, but kind of opening that same wound again to deal with that same issue. So that's something that jumps out in the second creation of man. You see a earlier, foreshadowing of Jesus's wounds and his treatment, but also anesthesia potentially being common to both Adam and Jesus, who's the new Adam. Jesus is maybe also having anesthetic, just like Adam had anesthetic. They underwent very, very similar, mirroring each other very closely, more than people think. Adam and Jesus. Not many Christians know that's a traditional title for Jesus. New Adam. Who's the first son of God? Adam. This will clear up another thing about people saying Jesus is God. Jesus is God. God is only Jesus.
That's one of the questions that I was going to jump into, and actually I invited Andreas to jump on this one. Maybe we're going to have to do a part 3, dude, because we're only getting to half my questions. So maybe we'll have Andreas jump on this next one, because I heard him going hard in that one chat that we were both in there about the Trinity and how it is satanic, the idea of the Trinity. And I was curious to pick his brain on it, but also yours, Doctor. Tell me, what is the Trinity? What does it symbolize? What is it, the real meaning? And or is it just saying that Jesus is God? Is that incorrect?
It's real tough. You got to be careful. got to be careful. You need to be more leaning on the side of Jesus was God than if your first reaction is to say, well, I'm God. We're all God. Well, yes,
That's
but
Luciferian.
yes,
Yeah,
but we're all
yeah.
God. You got to be careful with that. You got to be real careful, because what have you done to earn this? Have you done anything close to what Jesus did to earn this title? You know,
Nope.
I think I'm a little bit of an adoptionist. If you've heard of adoptionism, that Jesus, yes, he was chosen, prophesied. There was something miraculous about his birth, something miraculous. But he also had to qualify himself. He didn't just sit on his ass and, oh, I'm Messiah. I'm just going to wait till I'm 30. He
So
did
there's
have,
the goofballs, right, that will say that he had to, well, that he went to these elite secret societies. He went to like the mystic schools, and that's what he was doing for 30 years. Is there something to that? And when you saying that he earned it,
yeah,
I'm curious where, and
yeah.
is there something, were there other Christs? Are we going to get into some like the other goofball territory about the Christ consciousness and the different things?
Yeah.
All the things that my listeners will yell at me about.
Well, I really back away from the Christ consciousness thing.
Okay.
People get so drunk on that. And
Yes.
I work at this bookstore. I like to think I'm on like the front lines of like the New Age versus Christian versus, all the religions kind of duking it out. I see a lot of people coming in with problems. Sometimes they treat the store like a therapist. Sometimes people come in here because they're soul searching, or they need help, or they're doubting, they're, whatever. I see a lot of these people come in. The people who are always in the worst shape are the ones who are most unwilling to read a Bible, talk about Jesus, or give Jesus any authority above themselves. That's the number one thing I find in troubled people. The thing they have in common is they don't like to talk about the Bible. They don't want it. They scoff if I say. People come in here all the time and they say, what's your number one book? What's the number one book? What's your favorite book? Point me to. And I always go straight to the Bible and say, this is the Bible. Have you read it? If not, you should, because everything else, that's the strongest foundation to get into anything else is the Bible. That's how I feel. And it's amazing how people always go, well, the church. Well, we're not talking about the church. Just pick up the Bible and read it, Blah, 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 blah. Okay. I want to answer your question about who was Jesus. Was he God? We can know one thing for certain. He came closer to God than any man that's ever lived. Closer to God. If anyone deserves the title of God in a man's flesh, it was him. But I also want to say that God is not exclusively Jesus. That is the real crime. That is the idolatry that's happening. To say that the God that gave Moses the law, the God that created Adam, so Jesus created himself. Jesus created the problem that he, and I'm not trying to be like condescending to this, the scripture or whatever, but to think that Jesus was the one, Jesus in his own form, his identity, his ghost body, whatever, that he's God, that is, I think, sacrilegious. That is, I think, an offense to God. And I think when Jesus says, don't pray to me, pray to God, don't even call me good. Jesus says, don't even call me good. I don't know if anyone's good except for God. I take
Yeah,
that
I mean, he
serious.
really made a delineation. And he said, but I mean, I guess, and then the other part of that is, I guess maybe Jesus was an avatar in the flesh here to God, right? The whole idea of no man comes to the Father except through me,
Well,
right? But he did always describe the Father also.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he said he's going to sit at the right hand of his Father.
Right. Not on top of his head or on his lap or, exactly. Now, I don't believe in the Trinity. I don't hold the Trinity as some original Christian concept, I don't think the Trinity is worth much. I think the Trinity's main function is transcending or doing away with duality. Because you've got this one God, right? And I believe in one God. I don't think that's a Tangu psyop, right? I believe in one God. And even the pagans, you know, you get all these pagans, neo-pagans or whatever together, and you know, the Hindus, pantheists, whatever. You get them together and you say, okay, there's one God, there's another God, there's another. But what's behind it all? Even in their own terms, they'll concede that yes, there's one greater God, one greater oneness that produces all this. And you got to be careful with this, because the oneness can't be half and half, good and evil, right? God is not 50-50 with the devil. The devil is a slave to God who provides the necessary, what's the word? Like resistance. The necessary resistance to kind of push up against God's creation and limit, restrict, and hold things accountable, right? The devil is Satan. Satan, Saturn, the space and time. Yeah, I forgot what we were talking about again, but
The Trinity. Yeah.
the Trinity. Yeah, the Trinity.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Trinity, what it is it's a way of triumphing, triumph, right? Triumph. If there's good and evil, who triumphs? This is where we get the word triumph. You know, the Trinity is the way of overcoming evil. If we only have one God, a lot of people's natural inclination is to split it. Okay, well, God is everything, but then everything must be half good and half bad. So you fall into this duality, or this demiurge mentality, right? Triumph. The Trinity triumphs over duality because you're supplying an answer. You're supplying a savior. You're supplying the union. You're saying that the union between masculine, feminine, light or dark, the third, is what reconciles the two. So if you just condense it to one, you can say God is good. But where does the bad fit in? Is it only half of the good? Or, you know, I actually prefer to use a 7-based system, which will kind of get us into Elohim. What is Elohim? What's Eloha? What's El? What's the difference? You know, why plural? I prefer to use a 7-based system. But not everyone's an astrologer. Not everyone believes in the chakras or knows how to, you know, get their head wrapped around that. So the Trinity is okay. But the Trinity is not God. You can't just say God is the Trinity. You know, and if anything, there's a 4-ness to God too. You know, Yahweh, Jehovah, you know, there's 4 letters here, right? So also, I think Yahweh is just the breath of life. I think God has different names, but Yahweh is the breath of life. And God is good. Yahweh is the breath of life. And Lord is God acting in his more disciplinary stepfather role, right? And this is how I like to think of God. God is like the owner of a company. He's the owner, right? But the owner isn't always most active in the day-to-day business. He'll have a CEO. There'll be a board of directors, right? I like to think of the 7 visible planets as a board of directors. There's the owner, but the owner doesn't even have to come into work if he doesn't want to. You know, the owner can stay at home. He can be over there. He can be anywhere. The board of directors is like the 7 planets. And when we say Elohim, the original Hebrew mystical interpretation of Elohim is the 7 planets. They're not angels. Angel is cherubim or something else. Elohim is lowercase g, gods. So when people say gods in other pagan cultures, they're really just talking about the planets too. And also I want to talk about this. We kind of missed it earlier. When God creates the first group,
Mhm.
When God creates the first creation of man, he tells them to be fruitful. Tells them to be fruitful. Hang on. I need to double check this. The second creation, he doesn't tell to be fruitful.
Interesting.
At least not until the third chapter. It's hang on. Okay, so third chapter, it's not in there. Fourth chapter, not in there. So essentially, God doesn't tell the second creation to be fruitful. So another distinction that I want to make here is we kind of see what would become Israel, or the covenant of Israel, the concept of a chosen people. It's never been about a nation or a patch of land. There's the early beginnings of what would become this so-called chosen people, right down to these two creations. And again, I'm not saying I'm fully bought into the two creation theory, but it really does give an interesting perspective on the first creation was told to be fruitful. Do you know what I think that fruitful is? I think that's fertility culture. I think that's fertility rites in the ancient world, all over the place. You know, this is kind of like the Bach saga stuff too. You know, fertility culture was real. Well, you know, why is there all this gay stuff and sex stuff on all these ancient temple walls? They're being fruitful. Maybe too fruitful.
Too
Because
fruitful, yeah.
fruit is the same root as saying Freya and Venus and goddess worship. So being fruitful outside of the garden, I think this is where you see indiscriminate goddess worship and fertility worship, where the original commandment for that creation was just to be fruitful. So if you want to talk about the racial component too, which race is the most fruitful? You know, they're just banging all day, like, you know, popping out kids, and monkeys are kind of like, you know, there are versions of man and
It would
versions.
shock you if I told you how many first cousins I have. Mexicans do it too.
Well, there you go. But you know, the whole thing about the first
Irish and Mexicans. There, we got someone in the chat.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, the only commandment for those first people, you know, they had dominion, they had these other things, but they were told to be fruitful. That second creation of Adam and Eve, they weren't told to be fruitful. So maybe they were like an angelic Ubermensch type thing that wasn't meant to procreate, but kind of got caught up in procreation, got dragged into it and stuck in like a reincarnation, birth cycle, birth and rebirth. All this divine consciousness that they put into Adam and Eve's head spilled over into the other races, and, you know, Cain and Abel are moving
Well, they
around.
were the first sentient man, right? Because like the way you described it before, the first creatures were just created in this image, and like in my mind,
Right.
they were like the first NPCs. They were just people that were here. They were bags of flesh with no divine enlightenment, and without the breath of life.
No, that's true. And there's some good comments on here too, pointing out the differences between the two. I can't keep up with them all, but just the theory that kind of Adam's lineage, who would also kind of become Noah's lineage and Abraham's lineage, this tight bloodline, they need to be more chaste than everyone around them. They need to, that's kind of stemming from the same theory, right? But that this chosen family was chosen because they were created differently with a different intent. Maybe were intended to preside over other people or whatever, but they're being held to a higher standard. Don't spill your seed for no reason. Don't do this. Don't be virtuous. They're being compelled to virtue. The people outside, the land of Nod, or the people outside the Garden of Eden or Cain and Abel's area, the land of Nod, I like to think of like, it's almost exactly like you said. Nod makes me think of nodding off, nodding to sleep, like NPCs. Like the outer people mind doesn't work. They're stuck in an unconscious state. The nodding people, the people of nod, nothing, not, nod, much going on, right? Those people, I think, were just stuck in this kind of like innate fertility worship, where they worshipped sex, they worshipped, they did all these sacred Gnostic rites and all this stuff. And that's what Adam's family, later Noah's family, later Abraham's family, they're rubbing it up against these people who are totally different from them. And God's not saying, all right, everyone get on the same page. He's saying, no, this one family needs to stay kind of insulated from everyone else who's stuck in this fertility culture. And like I said, I think they were getting too fruitful, and they were subject to more and more falls of mankind. And that fruitfulness ended up, by the time of Jesus and Canaanites and all them, they're having sex with animals. They're having, all these sex orgies. It's too fruitful. It's nasty, heathen, pagan stuff. And that's why the Hebrew families their way is always different. They're not with the multiple gods. They're with the one way. They think that's more virtuous. And so we get starting from that all the way to when it says the first creation, be fruitful. Second creation isn't explicitly told to be very fruitful like that. So, and yeah, we were talking about the Trinity. I think the Trinity, another part of that is the rising sun, the noon sun, and the setting sun. Osiris, Horus, and Set. Or Ra. It's either Ra or Horus, but Ra. It's Ra. It's more. Yeah. It should be Ra. Osiris, Ra, and Set.
Rise, so, yeah.
Osiris.
Yep.
Ra is right ascendant. So right ascendant is when the sun is directly up from the highest point in the sky. That's Ra. Right angle, right ascendant, Ra, Ra. Come on, that's good. Yeah, and then set is the sunset. So you see a trinity in the three faces of God, three faces of the sun. That's kind of one of, maybe you could say, a pagan influence on the Trinity. But Shiva has a trinity. I don't know if you can see it. Where's Shiva? Can you see Shiva up there?
I think so. Right up top? On top?
Yeah, on top. There's a trident. Yeah. Shiva has a trident. So Shiva has the trident. And Shiva is kind of like a demiurge, kind of not, kind of like Saturn, kind of not. Shiva's kind of like a mixture between Saturn and the moon. And so creation and destruction. And they say the moon is the closest to Earth and Saturn is the farthest. So I'm not a big Hindu expert, but Shiva has the trident. Shiva is kind of a triune god too. And ultimately, another part of this, I think the purest vein of the trident comes from Plato. Plato believed in a three-tiered soul, that the soul was triune. Each person's soul had a threeness to it, and that he believed in the three highest forms, or three Platonic, what are they called? Three Platonic, not solids. I was just looking this up. Ideals, maybe.
It's on the tip of my tongue as well. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
No, I was right. It's forms. So he believed
Platonic forms. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he believed in the three forms, but higher concepts like ideals: beauty, truth, and goodness. Beauty, truth, and goodness. And yeah, if we really want to stretch that, we can say that beauty is Rhea, Maria, the feminine, feminine aspect. Truth is kind of truth. You'd think is Jupiter or Jesus or the good guy.
That's where I would have gone with
But
it. Yeah.
but truth can be ugly. Truth can be real ugly, and kind of karma in a way is a truthful, being held, accountable. So I'd say truth comes from the Saturn element in this instance, Chronos, and then goodness comes from the sun, the Jupiter figure, the good guy, Thor. So Chronos, Rhea, Tor, I think we're seeing the same kind of archetype type thing in the Platonic forms. Truth, beauty, goodness. Now, he didn't say that's God, but when Plato says like the forms or the sphere of, the place of perfect forms, he's kind of talking about heaven. You could say roughly that's like a Christian heaven. Heaven isn't just where you go when you die. That's what so many people get wrong. Heaven is what's up. Also, the Lord's Prayer, amazing. There's a little secret in the Lord's Prayer. Did you know that?
Let's hear it, man.
In the Lord's Prayer, man, I don't know if I know the whole thing off the top of my head. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done.
Well, see how you just did it? That's how we did it in school. Thy will be done, comma, right? No. The comma comes a little later. Thy will be done. Not you are going to be done, but your will.
Yeah.
Will be done on earth. The comma is after the earth. When we read it that way, thy will be done on earth, comma, as it is in heaven, that's saying as above, so below.
Yeah.
It's going to happen down here as it already happened in heaven. It's just you put the comma here or here. It's like where we take a pause. We're unconsciously splitting up that sentence. His will's already been done on heaven. It's saying thy will be done on earth, comma,
as it is
in heaven.
I mean, I think that's the biggest thing that I've always had, like with arguments with, I have a lot of Gnostic brothers that, that I've had on the show, but, and they get so hung up on how awful it is here. And to me, this place is what you make it. And that is maybe what we're doing here. And like you were saying, that you don't have to focus on what you were or any of your other previous reincarnations, but to be here now in the present and to make this place heaven. Because, dude, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is they say that I'm in some sort of prison planet. I'm like, well, maybe, but maybe I just have some dope posters up and I love them so much. Or I have a window cell. I don't know what to tell you because I love it here. Yes. I think this place is beautiful. I love God's creation. I celebrate God's creation. And we can make this place heaven.
And a lot of these people don't understand the soul was created to inhabit a human body. That's the Christian worldview. Souls are not trapped in a human body. The human body is not the highest manifestation, but the highest realization of a human soul. The human soul, its duty, its destiny is to come into a human body. To think that a soul is stuck in this body, okay? It's such a entitled, spoiled, like what are you comparing this to?
It's a privilege, yeah, absolutely.
And I also want to say that I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. But,
reincarnation, God's will be done, bringing the heaven here.
Okay, yes, yeah. So I hate this meat suit mentality too. So we're tackling a lot of kind of false idols, false gods here. The divine feminine, the whatever the other one was, but.
We are a vessel, right? And we are created in God's image, and this is part of his, like, we are a piece of his kingdom currently. So I
Yeah.
think that you're right. We are supposed to respect this vessel, and that it is not just a meat suit. And the same people that call other people's sins out are also like eating Krispy Kreme donuts and getting 400 pounds, and that's also a sin. That's also treating
Yeah.
your vessel that God created. It's like, yeah,
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the meat suit thing, people are just, it's just another way of being spoiled. This meat suit. Oh, it's just an experience. Oh, I'm just an infinite idea floating through space, and I'm just spending a lifetime as a body. As a body. Really? You better be really assured of that DMT trip you took to think that there's this real world out there, that this is, there's infinite realities. But Buddhism gets drunk on this too, saying there's infinite worlds, infinite realities, but they deny a God and deny a creator. Buddhism and a lot of mind viruses similar to it. But I want to say that your face is an extension of your soul. So your soul doesn't just get assigned a random body. That's my main point here, is every cell in your body was formed because of your consciousness. You see people who are ugly, or they're stuck with mouth breathing, or they're stuck with a snarl, or they're stuck with these faces. That doesn't happen by accident. If you wear this face on your face, it's going to get sunken in. It's going to get stuck on. And people I'm a big believer in reading the face, reading the body, So the soul is oozing out through your pores, through your flesh. And I don't think this is just random, or the soul just lands here. You land in exactly with the parents you're supposed to get. You land exactly in the spot you're supposed to be. That's why I don't like these people becoming Hindu and Buddhist. Not because I'm threatened by it, or I think it's like worse than Christianity. But because if God wanted you to be Buddhist, you'd be born in Nepal. You'd be born there. And if it's really good for you and you seek it out and it does everything you need it to, awesome. But it's just a spoiledness that I don't like. God gave you so much philosophy and wisdom and science and whatever you want. Even yoga. There's yoga in the West. This, like, the Swedish and the Danish have been doing yoga for like thousands of years. And anything you think paganism has,
just don't go full Bach with it.
Right. Well, we're not being fruitful anymore. The time
you never go full Bach saga.
Well, the fertility cultures come to a close, but yeah. So whatever. I'm pro human body. I'm not Aristotelian. I don't think we're stuck. I don't think that matters, the real world or the only world, but I think it's a true world. This is a true world, not a false enclosure, not a human enclosure, not a human zoo, like some of the Gnostics think. I reject all simulation theories that's completely gay and made up. And people have been watching the Matrix.
It's about as provable as outer space and us going to fucking the moon, in my opinion. But yeah, I love it, man. This has been fun. We're rounded up on 2 hours here. Dude, time goes by so fast when we talk, man. We have to do a part 3 if you're down.
Of course.
This was a lot of fun, brother. Dude, this was an epic conversation. We touched on some awesome stuff. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Doctor, why don't you tell my audience, and of course your audience as well, what's the best place they can support you and find all your work?
YouTube, Old World Florida. Pretty easy to find. I've got an Instagram, Rumble, X, Old World Florida. Pretty much all of them. I'll pop up. Easy to find. I've got a Patreon too, but I've got a bookstore. If you're in Florida, you want to come to Florida, everyone's welcome at the Dancing Elephant Bookstore, Florida's #1 metaphysical book and crystal store.
Hell yeah, dude. One
Yeah.
of these days, I'm gonna. That's the wife and I's plan. Is our 2-year plan is to sell the home, go completely remote, do the podcast, and just go all over the country in an RV. That's the goal. Raise the family, go to all the big parks, all the national parks, and just unschool our little hippie Christian kids, Jesus loving hippies. So,
Yeah. Jesus was a hippie.
Yeah.
People forget that. But
and Florida will be one of the locations. So maybe I'll pop into the bookstore and surprise you one of these days, man.
awesome, man. Would love for it. Would love for that to happen, Nate.
Again, Dr. Narcolongo, I appreciate you, brother. Everybody in the chat, we love you guys, and let's do this again in a couple weeks, man. And maybe we'll get Exertus. I know it's right now. It's like it was 1 a.m. when we were starting. And I think he actually passed out. So we'll do it again, man. Cheers, brother.
Peace, Nate. Thanks again.